It began not with a bang, but with a void. On the morning of Tuesday, August 22nd, 1911, a French painter named Louis Béroux walked into the Louvre's Salon Carré to set up his easel. He planned to sketch Leonardo da Vinci's portrait of Lisa del Giocondo, a respected Renaissance work known to the French as La Joconde. But where the painting should have been, there was only a blank space on the wall, marked by 4 iron hooks. The artist wasn't immediately alarmed. Museum staff often removed artworks for photography or cleaning. He asked a guard to check, but hours passed with no sign of the painting. It wasn't until late that afternoon, more than 24 hours after the fact, that the museum staff finally accepted the unthinkable. The painting known better to the world as the Mona Lisa was gone. Before this moment, the painting was a masterpiece, but it wasn't a global icon like it is today. It was the brazen theft and the empty space it left behind that would launch it into the stratosphere of fame. The crime itself was shockingly simple, a testament to the Louvre's laughably poor security in the early 20th century. The thief was Vincenzo Perugia, a 29-year-old Italian handyman who had previously worked at the museum. Ironically, his job had been to help build the very protective glass cases meant to safeguard the Louvre's treasures, including the Mona Lisa herself. This inside knowledge gave him a crucial advantage, and on Sunday, August 20th, he hid overnight in a storage closet, as was the style at the time. The next morning, a Monday when the museum was closed for maintenance, he emerged wearing a work outfit, blending in perfectly with the other staff. He walked into the deserted gallery, lifted the painting from its hooks, and carried it to a service stairwell. There, he removed the panel from its heavy frame and glass, leaving them behind. Tucking the masterpiece into his work clothes, he made for an exit, only to find the door locked. In a twist of fate, a passing plumber saw his struggle, and assuming he was a trapped co-worker, unlocked the door for him, allowing Perugia to walk out into the streets of Paris. Once the news broke, it created a media firestorm unlike any seen before for a work of art. The Mona Lisa's face was suddenly on the front page of newspapers around the world. The French borders were secured, and checkpoints were set up across the nation. Both public and private rewards were offered for the Mona Lisa's safe return. The theft became a national scandal, and the public became obsessed. When the Louvre reopened a week later, a strange phenomenon occurred. More people lined up to stare at the empty space on the wall than had ever visited to see the painting itself. They left flowers and notes, turning the void into a shrine for their missing icon. The police investigation, meanwhile, was a sprawling mess. They found a single thumbprint on the discarded frame but couldn't match it to anyone in their files. The case took a bizarre detour when suspicion fell on the avant-garde artist Pablo Picasso and the poet Guillaume Apollinaire. Needless to say, they weren't the criminals responsible for this heist, but the authorities tried their hardest to make the facts fit their bizarre theory of the case. Little did the authorities know, the Mona Lisa was essentially right under their noses. For 2 years, the painting remained hidden in a false-bottomed trunk in Perugia's modest Paris apartment, just a few miles from the Louvre. The historical consensus on his motivation is complex. During his trial, Perugia presented himself as a patriot, claiming he stole the painting to return it to its rightful homeland. He believed, incorrectly, that it was one of the many artworks looted from Italy by Napoleon Bonaparte. In reality, Leonardo da Vinci had brought the painting to France himself and sold it to King Francis I centuries earlier. While Perugia may have harbored genuine nationalistic feelings, evidence strongly suggests a financial motive was at play. Letters to his family spoke of making his fortune, and his first move wasn't to gift the painting to the Italian state, but a crude attempt to ransom it back to Italy. Patriotism, it seems, was a convenient and highly effective defense, but profit was the likely goal. The end came in December 1913, when Perugia, using the alias Leonardo Vincenzo, wrote to an art dealer in Florence named Alfredo Geri, offering to sell him the Mona Lisa. And yeah, you don't have to rewind to hear that again. His alias was Leonardo Vincenzo. Geri, intrigued but suspicious, contacted Giovanni Poggi, the director of the Uffizi Gallery. They arranged a meeting at Perugia's hotel. There, the thief dramatically revealed the painting, pulling it from the secret compartment of his trunk. The two men authenticated the masterpiece by its brushwork and the Louvre's seal on the back, and then did something to one-up the audacity of the thief himself. Pretending they needed to finalize the purchase at the gallery, they took the painting for safekeeping and immediately called the police. At this point, it's probably pretty clear that Perugia wasn't the master thief he thought he was, and he was arrested soon after. The recovery was as sensational as the theft. Perugia was tried in Italy, where the public largely hailed him as a national hero due to his claim about having done it all for the glory of Italy and Italians. The Italian court was sympathetic, and he was given a lenient sentence of just over a year, ultimately serving only about 7 months in prison. Legend has it he received extreme preferential treatment from prison guards and the state, many of whom did see him as a legitimate Italian patriot. Before its return to France, the Mona Lisa went on a triumphal tour of Italy, exhibited in Florence, Rome, and Milan to massive, adoring crowds. When she finally returned to the Louvre in January 1914, more than 100,000 people came to welcome her home in the first 2 days. The theft had done what centuries on a palace wall could not. It had transformed a Renaissance masterpiece into a global icon. The world had learned the Mona Lisa's name, not just by seeing her enigmatic smile, but by feeling the profound shock of her absence. The true motivation for Perugia's theft remains mysterious, since there's no way he could have possibly been able to unload the art. That said, it looks as though his patriotism defense was an afterthought. All evidence seems to suggest that he saw the opportunity to swipe a valuable piece of artwork. However, it's important to remember that while he was stealing priceless art, the Mona Lisa he stole wasn't the mythologized painting of today. Without the theft by Perugia, it's unlikely that the Mona Lisa would have gone on to become the most famous piece of fine art in human history. And so, with that, it's interesting to consider that Perugia may have actually acted in a more patriotic way than he could have ever realized. After all, without his quote-unquote intervention, it's possible that we would be living in a world where Vermeer's Girl with a Pearl Necklace is the equivalent of our Mona Lisa. On December 17, 1967, Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt dove into the surf at Cheviot Beach in Victoria and vanished without a trace. The disappearance of a sitting national leader during the tense Cold War era, no less, stunned the nation and captured the world's attention. In the days and years that followed, Holt's fate became one of Australia's most intriguing mysteries. It spawned official investigations as well as a whirlwind of conspiracy theories ranging from plausible to downright bizarre. Harold Holt was a strong swimmer and an outdoorsy, adventurous figure, so a midday swim was nothing out of the ordinary for him. On the morning of December 17, 1967, Holt was relaxing near his holiday home in Portsea, Victoria, after wrapping up the year's final cabinet meeting a few days prior. That day, he drove with a small group of friends to Cheviot Beach, a secluded spot on the Mornington Peninsula known for its rough surf. Among the party were Holt's neighbors, Marjorie Gillespie and her daughter, along with 2 family friends, Martin Simpson and Alan Stewart. The Prime Minister, then 59 years old, was keen to cool off in the ocean. As they arrived, they noticed the sea was particularly turbulent, and witnesses later described the tide as the highest they had seen. The waves were noted to be up to 8 feet high, and there was a powerful undertow churning the water. Despite these intimidating conditions, Holt reportedly brushed aside concern. He had often swum at Cheviot Beach in choppy conditions, and even told his press secretary on another occasion, half-jokingly, not to worry about his risky hobby. Specifically, he even joked that there was no chance he would be pulled out to sea in the undertow. With characteristic confidence, Holt declared he knew the beach like the back of his hand and headed straight into the surf without hesitation. Simpson and Stewart followed him in at first, but quickly thought better of it. Simpson stopped when the water reached his knees, feeling a strong undercurrent that made wading further dangerous. Stewart tried to swim after Holt, but was caught by a strong undertow and turned back after realizing how powerful and frightening the current was. The others watched Holt boldly continue swimming into deeper, choppier waters. Marjorie Gillespie particularly kept an eye on him as he moved further out from shore, at one point noticing the water around him appeared to be boiling with turbulence. And you may wonder why I'm specifically highlighting Marjorie here, and well, stay tuned, but it's basically what you're thinking. Then, in an instant, to the surprise of no one and everyone all at once, Harold Holt was gone. One moment he was visible in the surf, and the next, the turbulent sea had seemingly swallowed the Prime Minister up. He didn't cry out or signal any distress as he disappeared, and according to Gillespie's account, there was no indication he was in trouble. Realizing something was terribly wrong, the group on the beach began to panic and get to high ground to look for any sign of him. The disappearance of a national leader triggered an immediate and intense response. Local police, naval divers, and rescue teams were mobilized with astonishing speed. Within an hour of Holt's last sighting, helicopters were patrolling over the coastline, and professional divers tethered to safety lines were battling the surf. By nightfall, nearly 200 personnel had descended on Cheviot Beach to join the search. It quickly became the largest search and rescue operation in Australian history outside of times of conflict. Searchers combed the shoreline, waters, and rocky coves for any trace of the Prime Minister, using boats and aircraft to survey a wide area. However, despite their massive mobilization, there was no sign of Holt whatsoever. Australia was left reeling at the unthinkable reality that its Prime Minister had simply vanished in the ocean. Over the next few days, the search continued with unwavering determination but dwindling hope. Conditions remained perilous. The sea was described as a washing machine, with heavy swells, turbid water, and strong riptides hampering divers' efforts. At one point, a small rescue boat even capsized in the rough seas, underlining the risks rescuers faced. Also, just as a quick aside, this really underlines how irresponsible the Prime Minister was being. He had to know that by engaging in a highly risky activity like this, he'd likely also be endangering future potential rescuers if something went wrong. In general, I prefer when world leaders don't engage in risky personal hobbies while serving in office. As the first day turned to night and then to the next morning, officials grew grim about the likelihood of finding Holt alive. On December 18th, amid gale-force winds and driving rain, an ABC radio bulletin somberly announced there was no meaningful chance of finding Holt alive. Indeed, the operation had shifted from a rescue to a recovery mission by that point. After about 5 days, the large-scale search was scaled back on December 22nd due to the lack of results and persistent dangerous weather. The official search was finally called off on January 5th, 1968, 3 weeks after Holt's disappearance, with authorities acknowledging that the ocean had claimed his life. In the immediate aftermath, the Australian government and public had to grapple with the shock and the practical implications of Holt's loss. Just 2 days after he went missing, on December 19th, 1967, Harold Holt was officially removed from office, and the Deputy Prime Minister was sworn in as caretaker leader. A memorial was attended by dignitaries from around the world, including President Lyndon B. Johnson and Britain's future King Charles III. Despite the enormous media attention and public grief, the government initially decided not to hold a formal public inquiry or coroner's inquest into the incident. Instead of an inquest, a joint report was prepared by the Commonwealth and Victoria Police and submitted in January 1968 to document what was known. This report, based on witness statements and the extensive search operation, concluded there was no indication of anything sinister. Holt's last day had followed a normal routine. His demeanor was unremarkable, and he had knowingly gone swimming in hazardous conditions. The report surmised that the turbulent surf and rip currents at Cheviot Beach simply overwhelmed him. To explain why a body never washed up, investigators noted several possibilities. Holt's remains could have been carried far out to sea by powerful tides, consumed by notoriously unfriendly Australian marine life, or lodged in underwater crevices along the shoreline. In short, the official view was that Holt's death was a misadventure of the sea, not a matter of foul play. The Australian government, accepting this conclusion, deemed no further inquiry necessary at the time. Even as officials settled on a straightforward explanation, many people found it hard to accept that a prime minister could simply vanish in broad daylight due to an accident. The extraordinary nature of Holt's disappearance, occurring in an era rife with espionage and communist paranoia, meant that conspiracy theories flourished in its wake. In the absence of a body or definitive proof, speculation filled the void. Over the years, a colorful array of theories and rumors have emerged, attempting to explain what really happened to Harold Holt. These range from sober conjectures to wildly imaginative fantasies, and I'm going to start off with the most absurd mainstream theory and work to what may be the actual sad reality. Perhaps the most infamous theory is that Holt didn't drown at all, but was abducted or picked up by a Chinese submarine. In this narrative, Holt was allegedly a spy for Red China, who needed to be extracted suddenly. According to this tale, on the day of his disappearance, Holt rendezvoused with a Chinese midget submarine lurking off Cheviot Beach. No evidence of foreign submarines was ever found, though this theory remains a staple of the folklore that sprung up around Holt. Under this theory, Holt lived out the remainder of his life in China, never again returning to his homeland. Notably, some conspiracists have pointed out that this theory may have intentionally been made to look silly, to distract from what really happened to the Australian Prime Minister. Another conflict-flavored theory speculates that the Central Intelligence Agency was somehow involved in Holt's demise. Proponents of this theory suggest that Holt might have been wavering in his support for the Vietnam War and was perhaps on the verge of pulling Australia out of the conflict. The conspiracy claims that the CIA arranged to remove Holt before he could change course on Vietnam. That said, there's no solid evidence whatsoever that Holt planned to reverse policy, nor any evidence of CIA involvement. Some have theorized that Harold Holt staged his own disappearance to start a new life, perhaps driven by personal or romantic reasons. This line of speculation gained traction from the fact that Holt was revealed to have had extramarital affairs. In particular, it was widely rumored, and later confirmed, that Holt had a long-time intimate relationship with Marjorie Gillespie, the friend from the beach that day. This fueled gossip that Holt might have faked the whole thing to run off with a lover. One version even suggests he arranged for a boat or submarine to pick him up after he disappeared under the waves, so that he could secretly escape overseas with his mistress. It's a dramatic story, but there is no evidence to support any aspect of it, and Marjorie Gillespie never appeared with a new German boyfriend named Helmut Holzheimer. A more somber hypothesis that arose in some circles was that Holt's passing was actually something much sadder. Australia in 1967 was facing mounting protests over its involvement in the Vietnam War, and Holt personally was under pressure as his government's popularity waned. Some wondered if the Prime Minister, feeling politically embattled, chose to go out on his own terms by just swimming until he couldn't swim anymore. Notably, he absolutely loved the water, and swimming was his favorite activity. Further, some have suggested that it seemed like he was in unnaturally good spirits, given how choppy the water was and the danger he faced. Nearly 6 decades later, the disappearance of Harold Holt continues to fascinate. In Holt's case, the most logical explanation is also the simplest. He overestimated his ability to conquer a very dangerous ocean spot and paid with his life. All available evidence and official investigations support the conclusion that Holt drowned due to natural causes. That said, personally, the theory that he went for one last swim, going out in a blaze of glory at his favorite spot, seems like it could potentially be accurate. A United States congressman vanishing without a trace sounds like something out of a Netflix series, yet that's exactly what happened to Jeremiah Harrelson. Harrelson, a pioneering African-American politician during the Reconstruction era, survived the horrors of an antebellum plantation to enter Congress. Despite this, we know remarkably little about his last years, and he disappeared without a trace, having become a disgraced public figure. The only thing that's certain is that this man's journey from the very bottom to the halls of Congress, to his mystery end, make for one of American history's most intriguing unsolved stories. Born in Georgia in 1846, he was sold twice as a child and endured brutal whippings that left his back scarred for life. With no formal schooling available, Harrelson taught himself to read and write as a young man. This self-education, combined with his natural gift for public speaking, propelled him into politics. By 1870, just 5 years after his emancipation, Harrelson won election to the Alabama state legislature as one of the first black lawmakers in the Reconstruction era. 2 years later, he advanced to the state Senate, where he pushed through laws focusing on equality between black and white citizens of the state. Harrelson quickly earned a reputation as a witty, eloquent speaker and an independent thinker. His talents didn't go unnoticed, and Frederick Douglass himself applauded Harrelson for combining keen humor with sound sense in his oratory. In 1874, at just 28 years old, Jeremiah Harrelson set his sights on the United States Congress. He ran for a House seat in one of Alabama's black-majority congressional districts and won with roughly 55% of the vote. Taking office in 1875, he joined the very small group of African Americans then serving in Congress. Harrelson sat on the House Committee on Public Expenditures and introduced bills to support public education and aid his constituents back home. However, the same forces that had propelled him to office also made his tenure precarious. His service deeply angered many ex-Confederates, and they worked incredibly hard, both through legal and illegal means, to ensure Harrelson wouldn't remain in Washington. In the 1876 election, Harrelson's voter base faced a rampant voter intimidation campaign, allowing an ex-Confederate Democrat to take his seat, essentially by force. Due to the suppression campaign against him and his supporters, in early 1877, Harrelson traveled to Washington to testify about voter intimidation tactics. Even after losing office, Harrelson didn't give up on public service, and he later served roles within the Washington bureaucracy. By the early 1890s, he had relocated to Arkansas to serve as a federal pension agent, helping veterans and widows file claims. Unfortunately for Harrelson, this chapter of his life ended in extreme disgrace. In late 1894, Harrelson was arrested on charges of fraud, accused of forging pension paperwork, and swiftly convicted in federal court. A judge sentenced him to 2 years in prison, the maximum penalty, which he served in the Albany County Penitentiary in New York. Newspapers in America and around the world picked up the story of the former congressman who would now be serving hard time for fraud. Harrelson was about 49 years old when he entered prison in 1895, and that's the last time he appears in known historical records. From that point forward, he vanished entirely from newspaper accounts and official documents. After serving his sentence, likely by 1897, Harrelson effectively stepped off the public stage. Once Harrelson dropped out of sight, his final fate became a subject of speculation. Lacking concrete evidence, biographers struggled to determine when or how he perished. The most infamous account of his demise emerged in the 1920s when a congressional biographical directory reported that Harrelson had moved to Colorado after his release. In this biography, it was claimed that he had been slain by, quote, wild beasts while hunting around 1916. Even Harrelson's portrait in the Library of Congress archives was long captioned with that grisly claim. According to the tale, the former congressman met that brutal end in the Rocky Mountains at age 69 or 70. In the absence of any other information, this lurid story took hold and was repeated for decades as fact. Today, historians generally doubt the wild animal story. Modern research has found no evidence that Harrelson ever relocated to Colorado permanently, and there's no evidence that he ever even traveled there. There's no death certificate, no known grave, and no contemporary news report to verify the account. The wild beast's tale appears to have been based on nothing more than hearsay or mistaken identity. Some have suggested that he may have perished while he was in federal custody, and that the authorities simply never reported it or even covered it up. In support of this theory, proponents have argued that the living standards in American prisons in the late 19th century were abysmal and diseases ran rampant. Further, despite being a disgraced politician, Harrelson still had access to politically powerful friends who may have made life very difficult for those who had custody of him when he perished. However, all that said, this theory is purely speculative and simply relies upon the circumstantial evidence that he was in prison and the prisons were unsanitary. Yet another theory suggests that Harrelson was released and simply left the country afterwards. It's been speculated that he may have quietly moved to Canada or Latin America, where he lived out his life under an assumed identity, escaping the disgrace of his criminal conviction. Supporters of this theory believe that given that he was released from prison in upstate New York, Canada would have been his most likely destination. Despite substantial efforts over the last decades, no new evidence has turned up, and the consensus among experts is that Jeremiah Harrelson's fate remains a mystery. He remains one of the few people to have served in Congress whose fates are entirely unknown to history.